Good evening. Welcome back to SF Commons. Tonight we will be covering very important propositions that are in the state and local ballots. This coming November 6th, the general election, most of you have already received your ballots, both San Francisco and all different counties, and you have received your California voters pamphlet. Tonight we are covering Propositions 1 and 2. Propositions 1 and 2 talk about housing. Proposition 6 is about repealing the gas tax. And Prop C is a bold initiative in San Francisco that would mitigate the incredibly oppressive homeless problem that's confronting our city.
Homelessness all over the headlines this week, and this evening we are going to answer a question that many of you have been asking for years now. If San Francisco spends nearly $250 million on the homeless every year, why are there still thousands of people living on the street? Where does that money go, and how does the system work or not work? KPIX5's Wilson Walker takes it all apart for us.
It's the result of programs that are not really working, not working to anybody's satisfaction.
Well, it's hard to argue with that, but to better understand how this all works, let's start with that one big number. $241 million. Now, of that, 50 million funds shelters and another 50 million fund health services for the truly homeless. But the single most important thing to know about that $241 million is that most of it has absolutely nothing to do with the people we see on the streets.
That is a great observation. I think it's missed by many in the city. We're not spending $241 million a year on the 7,000 or 8,000 people who are homeless in San Francisco. We're spending more than half of that money, actually, to keep people in permanent housing.
That's right. $140 million worth of the entire homeless budget houses approximately 9,000 people. And those are 9,000 people we don't even count as homeless.
It's like all of our hotels, people who've lived in housing for 10 years are in the homeless budget. So people will say, well, we don't notice it. But if we didn't spend that money, you'd notice it because the numbers would be off the charts.
So my name is Dionne Jones, and I'm a retired nurse who worked for over 36 years at San Francisco General as an HIV nurse. The reason I got involved in this campaign and feel extremely passionate about it is that for the last few years, pretty much since 2013, in our fight against the HIV epidemic in San Francisco, we now have the tools to really end this epidemic. And we've done a lot of really good work and have been able over the last 5 years to reduce new HIV infections, to really focus on prevention and the care of people living with HIV. And our progress now is stalled in large part, because of the housing crises that we have here in San Francisco. So it's really impossible to really roll out effective prevention measures around HIV or any other communicable disease, and care for people who have chronic illnesses such as HIV if you cannot house people. And this humanitarian crisis that we have, with over 7,000 people living in shelters and on the street, but many, many more who are really the hidden homeless, people who are couch surfing, who are living in transitional houses that have made the courageous step to go into drug treatment program or mental health programs, and at the end of all of this hard work find themselves back on the streets because of our lack of affordable low-income housing. So Proposition C was developed with input from many, many people who are experts and have a wealth of experience in the issue of low-income housing, homelessness, health care for the homeless, and is a measure whose time has come to really address the homelessness crises, this humanitarian crisis, by actually providing housing. So many people who oppose this measure, which include the mayor, many of our elected officials, State Assemblyman David Chu, State Senator Scott Wiener, the governor candidate, former Mayor Gavin Newsom, former Mayor Willie Brown, are all using the argument that we are spending enough already and that we have to get smarter, better, more efficient, more accountability with the existing dollars that we're spending on homelessness. In reality, we spend only 3% of the city's budget on homelessness. And the current strategy that was really formulated under the late Mayor Lee, which was the creation of a Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, was created by taking existing programs and resources from other departments, such as the health department, and trying to take a coordinated approach to addressing the 7,000 homeless people who are on the streets. But it didn't come with any new housing. So besides my background in HIV, the other reason that I really got involved in Proposition C is that my granddaughters go to a local school here in the Mission, Buena Vista Horace Mann. There's 600 children who attend that school. Through a recent survey, that school realized that over 65 of their students were actually homeless. And this is not unique in San Francisco. 1 out of every 25 student in the San Francisco Unified School District is part of a family that is homeless, functionally homeless. The wait for shelter for families in San Francisco is over a year long. And so that school committed to turning over one of their gyms to actually creating a shelter for that school, for the 65 children and their parents to be able to stay there until they are able to be taken care of by what the city housing and homelessness services should be. So this is again an example of people from all over the city, all walks of life, who are stepping up and saying we are living with a humanitarian crisis and we all have to do our part. Proposition C allows the city to do its part and to actually fund housing, fund mental health, homelessness, and addiction services. It addresses prevention of homelessness through allocating rental subsidies to prevent people from becoming homeless, and focuses on youth and families in order to really mitigate the long-term effects of what this humanitarian crisis is about.
So what's the financing mechanism on this proposition? So the city will tax certain businesses whose gross receipts is above $50 million.
Correct, and very dramatic. The brilliant strategy around Proposition C is that rather than tax homeowners in San Francisco who are already paying extremely high property taxes because of the affordability issue and the high price of housing, rather than go to a sales tax, which really is disproportionately hurtful to low-income people, rather than tax all businesses, which is really hurtful to small businesses, it targets the larger corporations and any gross receipts, sales of over $50 million. And these are the same businesses and corporations who just 9 months ago got a 14% tax break. And it taxes, on the average, less than 0.5% of these receipts over $50 million. So the Mark Benioff of Salesforce announced that he was coming out in support of Proposition C for that very reason. He said that in this kind of situation and in this climate, you're either with the homeless or you're against the homeless. And he's choosing to position himself with the homeless and to do what they can do, even though his company is one of the companies that is going to end up probably paying $10 million a year in additional taxes by this.
Over $300 million.
Correct.
And does it specify how that is going to be spent?
So it's a carefully crafted measure that really is very transparent about how the money is spent. So less than 3% will go to administration. 50% is going to go to actual new housing, and it will house 4,000 families, youth, and adults. And 25% is going to be specifically targeted around mental health and substance use services. 15% of the $300 million generated will go to prevention. And this is in the form of housing subsidies to allow people to stay in their home. So over 70% of people who are living on the street were housed San Franciscans who ended up losing their housing. And oftentimes they lost their housing because of the affordability crises.
Exactly.
They got evicted. And so 15% will go towards prevention. Another 10% is going to go to clean streets and sanitation, and including additional shelters and navigation centers, because every night in San Francisco there are 1,000 people who are willing to go into a shelter bed who don't have access to it. The existing Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing does not have new housing. And so people are getting moved in and out of these stabilization programs, navigation centers, etc. And when their time's up, they're back on the street. Our mayor, London Breed, David Chu, our state assembly person, Scott Wiener, our state senator, Gavin Newsom, who is running for governor, Willie Brown, the San Francisco Chronicle, have all come out against it.
Proposition 1 is on the November ballot. It's a $4 billion bond to fund affordable housing for families, people with disabilities, and veterans. It's a critical issue right now, obviously, in the state. We face an unprecedented housing crisis. 1 in 3 Californians cannot afford a normal home. 1 in 3 Californians cannot afford the median rent in the county that they live in. In San Francisco, where I live, rents are $3,300 a month is a typical asking rent. You'd have to earn over $100,000 a year to be able to afford that rent. And it's no surprise that with rents this high, we have many people leaving the area. Businesses are suffering. We have unprecedented levels of homelessness on our streets. And Proposition 1 is going to make a huge difference in that. It will create or help renovate and preserve over 50,000 affordable homes, making a huge difference in the Bay Area and throughout California. So Proposition 2 is a $2 billion bond that takes funds that are already coming to the state of California through Prop 63, which is the Millionaire's tax that was passed back in 2004. That tax funds the Mental Health Services Act, which has been used in the state of California to great success for the last decade or so. But one of the real hard things about serving people with mental health illness or mental illness is that so many people that have mental health problems are living on our streets. In fact, 1/3 of the 134,000 homeless people in our state are estimated to be living on the streets with a severe mental health problem. So what we're doing with Proposition 2 is taking a share, a very small percentage, less than 6% of Prop 63 funds that come to the state annually, and using that to pay bonds to build housing for folks that are homeless, living on our streets, and in need of this combination of services and housing. The really important thing to know about both Propositions 1 and 2 is they're going to fund programs that we know already work. Proposition 2 in particular is going to fund supportive housing, which is homes that combine affordable housing with services for folks that are experiencing significant mental health problems. Those types of programs are starting to work throughout the state. I work for a nonprofit housing organization that does this type of work. 97% of the people that move into this housing in San Francisco stay housed permanently after they move into this homes, providing a permanent exit from homelessness. So it's going to make a gigantic difference to the folks that we're talking about. Proposition 1, the funds that go to Proposition 1 will fund a variety of programs. $1 billion of Proposition 1 is focused on veterans and will go into existing, already successful veterans housing programs. And then the balance, the other $3 billion of Proposition 1, will go to both the state and local governments to partner together to create over 50,000 housing opportunities, a combination of new homes and acquisition and preservation of existing affordable housing, to make sure that we have extremely transparent use of these funds and extremely efficient use of those funds at risk or currently experiencing homelessness. In the Bay Area alone, there are over 14,000 kids in our schools that are homeless. They go to school every day from a shelter, living in a car, living on the streets, and it's time to really take some serious action around this. And one of the great things about combining Prop 1 and 2 for the voters is that we'll have a huge chance to create as many as 70,000 affordable homes from these two propositions combined. Proposition 1 and Proposition 2 are on the ballot. They provide in combination a $4 billion and $2 billion worth of funding for affordable housing, and this comes at a critical moment. Several years back, in the midst of the financial crisis, the state cut over $1 billion a year to affordable housing, and the federal government has cut hundreds of millions of dollars a year in funding. So at this moment, where we are experiencing the largest affordable housing crisis in our nation's recent history, as well as the largest homeless crisis across the state of California and throughout our country, we're actually spending less than we ever did to make these programs work.
So Proposition 6 is on the ballot, and it basically repeals the gas tax that was passed by the California legislature and approved by the governor, and it was put in place in November last year, right?
Correct.
So now this proposition repeals that.
Burden. For a family of four, it's approximately $779 a year. It could be more depending on how much you commute to and from work. And we have this on the ballot currently because the governor had promised not to increase any taxes without voter approval, and this went through without voter approval at all.
Hi, I'm Tom Rubin. I have been in the government, transportation, and finance business, mainly here in California, for over 4 decades. So what I would like to do is start by giving you some of the numbers. California has some of the highest costs of driving in the nation. Before SB 1, which is what we're talking about repealing, went into effect, the cents per gallon that you paid for gasoline was about 46 cents. I'm including the federal 18 cents because most of that comes right back to California. Then we have cap and trade, which was put in just a few years ago and affects gasoline prices. And we don't know exactly. The others, we have a fairly good idea, but the range of estimate for cap and trade is somewhere between about 15 and 63 cents a gallon. Then we have sales tax, which you pay not only on what you pay for the gasoline, but on the taxes that you pay on gasoline. So using the low end, the 15 cents for cap and trade, that was about 76 cents a gallon. Now, SB 1 will add about another 14 cents initially and then go up. So you'll be paying at least 90 cents. And again, that's a low end. I've seen estimates much higher per gallon, 90 cents per gallon for gasoline, more than that for diesel. This does not count tolls, including what's going to be going up with SB 3. You'll be paying $9 to cross the Bay Bridge during peak. Vehicle registration, which also was increased substantially. And then sales tax when you buy a vehicle or parts, parking fees, fines and penalties, etc. Here's what's most interesting. The vast majority of what drivers pay in California, over 70%, does not go for roads. It goes for other things, mainly transit. Now, I've got nothing against transit. I've worked in transit for years. But why can't we use the money that the drivers are paying to use the roads to keep the roads up? And that's what we're talking about. The problem is not a shortage of money. There's plenty of money. The problems are, one, we aren't using the money for roads. The money we are using, we're doing for bad projects And 3, we are not doing those projects very well.
Even with the new fees for selling vehicles, the estimated revenue alone just for that is about 1.6 billion. I think it's we do have the funds there to allocate to the roads, and I don't think everything's being allocated to the roads. And even when you start taking a closer look at how funding is being allocated today, once this went through in November 2017, the number of engineers that are being hired, in some cases, in some of the reports that I've read, there's an estimate that there's an overage in terms of the number of engineers that are being hired for these projects, the amount that the salaries that we're paying some of these employees as well. I think in San Diego and in LA, there's an estimate between 46 and 56% of all the workers are paid greater than $100,000 and $100,000 a year, which is higher than the per capita in that area. And even the CEO of, I think if it's of the San Diego Transit Authority, he's getting paid $536,000, I think it is, for 194 employees. So you have to step back and ask yourself, do we have a spending problem and not necessarily a revenue problem? And is this the reason why we've added another tax to cover this excessive spending?
Is there a mechanism that the state will not be able to just impose new taxes or similar tax like this without the public being aware of it?
Yes, that's one of the elements of this proposition. It will restrict the state legislature from increasing these types of taxes in the future. And what was done was perfectly legal under the Constitution. The state legislature, by a 2/3 vote, very close, and a lot of people were pressured, but 2/3 vote, did pass it, the new tax, and the governor signed it. And that's perfectly legal. They did not want to go to the people because they knew very well that there's no way that the people would have passed it by a 2/3 vote, which was required. So they did it in the legislature. And again, this sends about 2/3 of the money raised back to roads, which is actually high in California. Like cap and trade, virtually nothing is going back to roads. That's going for transportation for high-speed rail, which doesn't have a financial plan and may never, ever carry anybody anyplace. So the government people in Sacramento are doing what they often do, take the existing money, let's do it for the things we want to build, and then we'll tell the people we're short of money for what the people want, like roads, and we'll get them to vote for more taxes for that. What we would like is fund the roads first.
Right.
Because without it, people have a harder time driving.
Right.
And frankly, there's no other way for people to get around. I've been in transit for decades, and I strongly believe in it.
You don't have any choice. If you now you have to live further in order to afford
to pay rent.
Rent or a home. So you're driving further.
Exactly.
And now with RM3, you're going to pay more toll, and then you have more. You're paying more with gas taxes. You're just paying more and more and more, and there are these fees. And as I mentioned earlier, they even increased, the fees at the DMV. That went up in January.
Yeah.
And so it's just fee after fee after fee. So you're basically paying more and not necessarily making more money.
And I'm going to give you an example, and this will be a San Mateo County example. BART to SFO and Millbrae. Now, this was a really crazy deal. Basically, the Bay Area applied for a grant to build BART to SFO, and in return, San Mateo County passed a sales tax to pay for BART extensions to Pittsburgh, Antioch, and Dublin, Pleasanton. Don't ask. It sounds silly, but that's really the way it worked. Then it was a terrible design to have two hubs, one at SFO and one at Millbrae. Has never worked. Everybody in the transportation business told them it was stupid from day one, but no, we have to have direct connection to SFO, so they built it. The original budget was a little under $1.1 billion. The actual was over $1.7 billion. What was even worse is all of the overrun had to be paid locally. The state and the federal share stayed the same. So the local share went from 270 to 650 million. Oh, wow. And that very large part of that was on the taxpayers of San Mateo County. Wow. It was also 3 years late getting open. Then the projected ridership was going to be 80,000 in 2010, the year it was supposed to open. I just checked. It's currently about 48,000, so it fell way short of the ridership projections. Now, to make it pencil out, the assumption was the ridership would be so high there wouldn't be any operating subsidy. It would pay for itself on operations. Well, they've come nowhere close. So this stuck San Mateo County and Samtrans with having to make a very large subsidy, and this has amounted to tens of millions of dollars in various deals that have been cut. And as a result, the bus service was cut and the fares went up. So this was a really bad idea from day one and has done great harm to many people who really need transit because they're mobility challenged due to age, due to financial status or physical condition or whatever. They are the ones that are really taking the hit on this more than anybody else to build this monument to poor transportation planning and design. And unfortunately, there are so many cases of this in the Bay Area. I could sit here for the rest of the week and tell you more stories. Well, what I hope will happen is that the people in Sacramento will go back and say, we've got to make some changes. I am hoping that they will say, let's stop funding stupid transportation projects. Let's take some of the money that we have started collecting from drivers and use it for what the drivers need and should be paying for, namely roads, keeping our roads in good condition. There is no shortage of money. Welcome to government finance in California. I would just like to say I'm here representing Livable California. We are a localism group. Our job is liaison between local communities and legislators, particularly in Sacramento. We want a bigger role in the decisions that affect our community, particularly land use, transportation, and taxes. We don't want people 100 miles away making decisions that impact us without knowing what we want.
Thank you for joining us again. See you next time. Good night.